Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
All right, welcome back. It's been a hiatus, but this is a very special episode of Detroit is Different. Like most times I say it's special, but this one is going to be a deeper one because this is a man that is of that ilk. Like my dad, somebody that's a professional, definitely knows his way in and around this city. Detroit is different because it is so unique. And this man is right now currently running for mayor of the city of Detroit, coming up in 2021. But he's also an attorney, a father, a Detroiter, somebody that loves Detroit. And when I say attorney too, he has the mind of as the great attorney Perkins always says, like, law is like a strange bird. So, attorneys have ways of seeing things, deciphering information, and this man definitely does that well. Anthony Adams, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, Kyrie. How are you, sir?
Man, everything is everything. A good Saturday, and we happy to be out and about in the city.
Man, I'm sitting here in the neighborhood, which is so wonderful. Love your studio. Love all the great sayings. And that coffee poster is killing me, man. I'm ready to take that with me. I remember when that movie came out.
Oh yeah, Pam Grier is definitely a fixture of Black culture, and definitely Detroit is different culture.
Well, I still have actually a collection of old DVDs, and I think I have Black Mama, Black was a Black woman, white woman, Coffee, all those movies,
Pam
man.
Grier
Pam Grier. That was my heart.
And then from that, we can even kind of get right into one of those discussions because, Hollywood was really at a crux of not existing before what was now, it's labeled Black exploitation films. Yes. But it took the Black face in films to save Hollywood. A lot of people don't recognize that, especially because it was labeled in a certain way. But in the 1970s, it was all of those stars. So Jim Brown and Richard Roundtree, Pam Grier, and TNT Jackson, and all of those films that help get the money
Isaac
back
Hayes
out there.
Even had a Yaphet Kotto.
Yes.
I mean, Fred Williamson. We had a lot of names. And that same trend actually continued on TV, in the early 90s, with Black TV, Black series coming on board, saving networks' survival. We've always been there in the gap to save America, but who's going to save us? We have to save ourselves.
And that moves us right to a Detroit discussion. And I definitely want to get to the general start questions, but Detroit is one of those unique places, as I say, it's different, that the Black creativity, the Black class has been relied on every step of the way in the past 100 years to keep Detroit relevant.
Black folks have been at the backbone, in the forefront of every progressive movement that has taken place in the city of Detroit. I mean, whether you go back into the early labor movements and some of the great Black urban labor leaders, whether you look at civil rights, whether you look at music, entertainment, art, Black people have always epitomized the greatness of Detroit. And I think we have to recognize that, but we don't pay enough homage to our own history. We kind of forget what was great about us. You have the birthplace of the Republic of New Africa, the birthplace of the Nation of Islam. I mean, you had the birthplace of the Shrine of the Black Madonna. You had a Black liberation theology that was at the core of what Detroit was a series of self-empowerment between individuals, recognizing that Blackness can be great and should be great, and we have to pay homage and recognize that.
Yeah, even in the Smithsonian Museum in D.C., if you walk through, you're going to notice so many Detroiters as you go through. Like the museum starts with the journey from the Mayafa of the Middle Passage, but then you have out of enslavement, and out of enslavement, you see so many Detroiters.
Right.
And it's like you see this person, that person, and it's like, damn, I guess like the face of America's history has so much of Detroit's Black history in it.
Well, because you had in Detroit, you had so many black business people who were independently wealthy and provided a great deal of financing and support for the civil rights movement. Whether you look at Pastor, for example, C.L. Franklin,
Yes,
who sent hundreds of thousands of dollars down south to help support these movements. Black business people, black churches, black labor leaders have always played an important role in that. And somehow or another, we've kind of lost our way about that. We got to get it back, because we were at the forefront of so many things that were progressive, that were good, that were meaningful. And that was a moment of empowerment that we had in our city.
most definitely. So that goes to the classic questions. Your family. What brought your family to Detroit?
So my family, actually, I came here in 1981.
81.
I came here during the height. It was right after the gas guzzler crisis. The automotive industry had kind of fallen flat on its face because they were continuing to make gas guzzlers when the world had moved away from that with the price of oil. The Arab oil embargo, which really put a big crimp on what happened. And I graduated from law school and actually got an appointment to serve as a law clerk to the Honorable Anna Diggs Taylor. She was the first African-American female woman on the Eastern District of Michigan. And so in that experience, I had a chance to observe up close and very personal the workings of the federal government, because obviously they have civil trials as well as they have criminal trials. And what I learned from that is the ways of deception and how they would come in and ask for their wiretaps and how they would construct their arguments about how they would infiltrate organizations in the city of Detroit, and understand how they operate and what their ultimate objective was to keep black folks minimized in their efforts and their activities. I recall in particularly one case where there was a very prominent black businessman who owned a bank. I'm not going to use a name. And he had a last name that was similar to a major drug dealing cartel in the city of Detroit. And when they came in for the wiretap, my federal judge said, "You guys have made a big mistake here, because this man is not related to these people." "Well, Your Honor, he just bought this bank. He paid cash for it. Where did he get the money?" Well, the guy was a very successful entertainer, entrepreneur, record executive who had amassed a wealth and was able to buy the things that he wanted to buy. So she denied the warrant for wiretap request because she knew that he wasn't even related to these people. Yeah. Now, if you don't have black people in positions of power who are not afraid to use that power, because she could have cowered and kowtowed and signed a warrant and let them figure out ultimately that he was not related, but she used her power in a way. So that it taught me that you really have to be very careful on these positions. You have to try to operate with a high level of moral integrity, and you got to be courageous in your decision to want to move the city forward.
Well, definitely. And speaking of that bank owner, and thank God that didn't happen, because I wouldn't have some of my favorite songs to play without that.
That's right. Well, his name is Don. It's Don Davis, a great friend of mine. Passed obviously not too long ago, but he was a trailblazer in the industry, and was a man who understood how to use his courage, how to use his money wisely to help sustain a black institution here in the city of Detroit.
Most definitely. And him and his brother, Will Davis. Right in this neighborhood, exactly. Like right around the corner. Central graduates.
In fact, he would tell me all the time that when he went to Central, there actually were not a lot of blacks.
Not at all.
And in fact, my first apartment was at Calvert and LaSalle.
Wow.
I could see Central High School out of my window. It was a 2-family flat. My landlord was Mr. and Mrs. Mann. I think Mr. Mann lived actually to be like about 102 years old.
Wow.
His son, Larry Mann, a very prominent attorney, he was clerking at that time for federal judge Fikens. So that was my first apartment in the city of Detroit. I loved that apartment. Very simple, easy to maintain. My rent was, I think it was $350 a month. And I thought that was a lot of money back then, because I think I was only making like $27,000 a year.
And you ran into some of the toughest basketball games you could think of if you were playing basketball in that neighborhood at that time.
I mean, Detroit there was just so much talent. I mean, there was so much athletic talent. Whether you went to a PSL football games, basketball games, baseball games, this city produced so many great athletes, but also so many great musicians. I mean, when you look at the Motown legacy and all of the Funk Brothers and where they went to school, the Detroit public schools had the greatest legacy of music of any school system in America, because how can you create that much talent in one city without having a strong public education system to provide the resources and means for people to move forward?
It was phenomenal. I think one of the key things that makes Detroit so different was that the opportunities provided for Black people here. And it was other cities, as they talk about the Great Migration. You had the Cleveland and the Pittsburgh and the Chicago, but here,
yeah, but it wasn't like Detroit. Because
nah.
what you had Blacks in many areas. You had Blacks in education. You had great Black educators. You had Blacks who were administrators in education. You had Blacks that were in business. You had Blacks that were in labor. You had Blacks that were in legal profession.
Yes.
You had Blacks that were lawyers and doctors. You had Blacks all over the place. People who had positions of responsibility and power. And it was a melting pot, which created home ownership and Black wealth. The city of Detroit at one time had the highest percentage of African-American home ownership of any city in America.
Yeah.
And now we're the lowest of any city in America for African-American home ownership. We've lost so much intergenerational wealth as a result of tax foreclosures, tax captures, which have stripped money out of our community, needed resources for our school system, and we've got to begin the process of changing that. It's 911 time for all of this.
Yeah, I mean, as the story came out, I couldn't even believe it. My dad sent me the story that was released late last year about the courts finally admitted that Detroiters were being overtaxed. But you can only go back like about 5-6 years, which is very convenient. Within the past 5-6 years, you have an influx of non-Black Detroiters that can now receive some of those tax monies.
But that was a cop-out, though, because if, in fact, Detroit folk have been overtaxed, then it's up to the administration to make right on the overtaxation.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking about overtaxation. We're talking about systemic overtaxation, which led to massive foreclosures and loss of property and home ownership in the city of Detroit.
Most definitely.
So where you have a wrong that's been committed against a predominantly Black population, then you have a responsibility to correct that wrong and do things necessary to get people their money back, assist them in getting their homes back. Because how do we create a vibrant city if the people who've been through thick and thin don't play a part in its resurgence and revitalization?
I agree. And then just picking up that story, 81, where were you coming from to come to Detroit?
I came here from Georgetown.
Okay.
I went to law school in Georgetown. I grew up in Cincinnati. My undergraduate training was in urban management, urban planning. I always wanted to be an urban manager. At that time, it was a big deal to be a professional city manager for a major city. And so what I learned from that experience is how they actually plan cities, how you deal with infrastructure, how you deal with transportation, looking at the racist policies of the Federal Highway Administration, which stripped and eliminated Black communities, Black bottom here in the city of Detroit, forced Blacks to move out.
Yeah.
How do you deal with transportation policy to move people from point A to point B? Understanding how all that fits together to create a vibrant city and policies that you need to promote in order to have a city that will thrive. You also understand the impact of state policy, because cities are creatures of the state, that we get our power from the state. How do state policies inhibit or enhance or grow the city of Detroit? In the early 80s, when I first joined Mayor Young's administration in 85, there was a big thing called the equity package, where the state legislature recognized the importance of Detroit. And so they had a separate special allocation that was given for the city of Detroit to help fund the Detroit Institute of Arts, to fund the zoo, to fund the library commissions and things of that nature. And then over time, systematically, the funding began to dwindle, and it placed more and more financial stress on the city to have to pick up the obligation to manage those things, which really created, I think, a death spiral for the city, because on the one hand, you're losing population. And I think the population was 1.3 million when I moved to the city of Detroit in 1981. To now in 2021, I think the population might be 650,000. So you've lost more than half the population since I've been here over 40 years. But even if you look back in 1950, you've lost almost 1.2 million people. You've lost probably 700,000 jobs. You have an economy that's still based on the structure of automotive industry and automotive supply that is so subject to swings given what happens in the economy. And so we've not begun the process of redeveloping or retooling or repositioning, I would say, the state. And it's very difficult to reposition the city of Detroit if the state of Michigan doesn't reposition itself, because our power flows from the state.
And definitely in this series, and one of the things that you're going to be one of the candidates we interview. Detroit is Different is partnered with Riverwise Magazine to do a candidate forum, but also just some voter education.
Oh,
so
please,
I've brushed up a lot of what I've known about the structure of the state granting rights to commission a city or a village or a township, and what that structure looks like, how that structure is, and this being such a heavy memorial city, what that is and how that is. You know, it's deep. And kind of going back to some of the other things you were talking about, coming from Cincinnati. My dad's from Cincinnati.
Oh, is it?
I got so much family like right there in Avondale to this day.
Avondale, okay,
so
all right, I know so about that, Dale.
Yep, and even Charlie Beckham, those people. So that relationship, and he talks about what it was like coming to the city and seeing just Blackness. The amount of black. That's exactly what he said. He says he got pulled over. He was like, he got pulled over by the cops early on and he was like, oh man, I got to deal with this. And he was like, damn, he was surprised to see 2 black officers.
Well, you know, it was so interesting because back in those days, especially in the 80s when I got here, that you always had a chance when you got stopped by the cops because they were mostly black. Mm-hmm. And so the story was, if you got stopped, the first thing they said was, you need to tell me what you got outstanding on you, if you got something outstanding, because I don't really want to put your name in the system, because if once your name pops up as a hit, I got to take action. So you need to tell me what you got. I got some tickets. I got this. It was a conversation. And it was because he had done such great work, he being Coleman Young, to transform the culture and the nature of the police department.
Yeah.
That they were sensitive to these because they were from the community. Yeah. And they weren't about the business of jamming people up. Yeah. It just was a much different world back then.
And I mean, when we really think about Coleman's rise to prominence through not just the unions, but to most Detroiters, it was breaking down stress in the Big Four.
Yes, yeah.
Because this was a place where police brutality before pre-Coleman Young was so rampant, as we know from the rebellion. Right in this neighborhood, that it needed to be changed.
It had to be changed because the relationship between the police and the community was so fractured, and he was able to run on that, even though it was a very close race. We have to remind people that it wasn't like he won overwhelmingly, like 80% of the vote. It was a very close race. It went down to the wire with the police commissioner, who basically was the embodiment of white racism, and keeping the communities down. John Nichols, who ultimately went on to do some other things, outside the city of Detroit, as most people do when they get run out the city of Detroit.
Yeah, and see, and that's part of the historic divide, because even when we look at like a community like mine and reframing what was labeled things like quote unquote like Devil's Night, which to me was something that at the time traditional media definitely hopped on top of. But the true framework of what was happening were people that left their homes, primarily white folks that left their homes, and wanted to come back and still make a little bit of money off of it. But it was painted like it's just like these ravaging black folks just burning down the city.
Well, it was, Detroit became the dumping ground for everything that was supposed to be bad with urban America, whether it was the Devil's Night phenomena, where people were constantly, quote, having their cars stolen in the city of Detroit. Detroit has always been the convenient whipping boy for the mainstream media, to try to paint a picture about the devastation of what occurs in the city of Detroit and who actually is responsible for that devastation. And so we've got to change the narrative, because I think people need to better understand the forces in play that have impacted the city of Detroit in a manner that I don't think you see in any other major city in America, because of the fact that Detroit is a predominantly black population.
Yes.
It's the largest, biggest, blackest city in America. And when you have a legislature that has not been receptive, at least over the last, I want to say 30 years, especially with the advent of John Engler and his reign of terror, throughout the state, where he eliminated programs for mental health. Closing the Lafayette Clinic, moving to a mass incarceration, mandatory minimum sentences, which led, excuse me, to mass incarceration of black individuals, a lot of whom we're now finding out were wrongfully convicted and have been exonerated after serving 30 years in jail.
Yeah.
Really? So we got to understand those forces and how they're at play today, because it's a very subtle form of, I'm going to call it reverse racism on ourselves. They want us to be fair. You need to be fair about these things. You don't need to discuss race. Well, no, we need to discuss race, because race has been at the forefront of every major decision that's ever been made concerning the city of Detroit, and we need to understand that.
And I definitely, on that point, I almost have to pull it out now, because I was wanting to definitely get in some more just in your story and your journey here.
Well, I can give you some more of that.
But I have a question directly to that.
Okay.
As one of the biggest debates I always get into, especially with friends that aren't as familiar with the city of Detroit, when they say, well, Detroit City's bankruptcy. And I'm like, well, we don't talking about the state of Michigan's profit sharing.
Well,
in the state of Michigan owing the city of Detroit millions, and really
hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the great shell game that was played in the 90s.
Please,
Dennis Archer is elected mayor. It's on the ballot about the casino initiative to move forward. It passed. No one ever thought casino gaming would pass in the state of Michigan. It passes by a narrow margin. You have preferences for preferences for at least 2 of the 3 casino licenses in the city of Detroit. What happened was, in exchange for passing legislation to enable casino gaming, there was a requirement that the city of Detroit would begin to reduce its non-resident income tax. Non-resident income tax, which had been a creature, I think, of Coleman Young. Well, he lobbied the legislature to get a non-resident income tax imposed on people who who worked in the city of Detroit but didn't live here.
Yeah.
So as part and parcel of that plan, they began to reduce the amount of income tax.
And I want to say this for everybody listening, that was important because it was a lot of folks. If you don't know, Detroit, like I always say, Michigan would be North Dakota if you took away Detroit. And I stand on that, meaning it'd be Wyoming or it'd be a flyover state.
Right.
Detroit is what gives Michigan its flavor. And all these white folks that don't like Detroit, when they go other places, they don't say they from South Lyon. They say they're from Detroit.
Exactly.
So it was a lot of people that worked in Detroit, profited from Detroit, but Coleman Young was like, okay, you don't want to be here, you're going to pay taxes here. Right. So you can continue.
So at that point, they also did another move. What they did was they began to reduce the amount of revenue sharing that the city was going to receive. There was a deal cut between the Archer administration and the Engler administration, which basically said that they would provide a fixed amount of revenue sharing for the city for a 10-year period in exchange for them reducing non-resident income tax, which obviously benefited the suburbs. Well, I think 2 years into that agreement, the legislature scrapped it, did not provide the city with the revenue sharing that they were supposed to get that was statutorily agreed to by the legislature and the city of Detroit. So that obviously begins to put a crimp in the city's finances. And on top of that, you had a period of time where when Coleman left, the size of the city's workforce actually had been reduced to its lowest level. Well, with Archer, he increased the size of the workforce, which increased the size of the benefits, which also increased the size of the city's payment. At the same time, when the city's losing non-resident income tax and losing revenue sharing. At some point in time, when your revenue begins to drop and your expenses rise, there's going to come a time when there is a reckoning that you have to do. But
and
there are also
this is for everybody day to day. This is you and your house.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
When you planning your family reunion barbecue, if you thought you had 50 people coming and now the 50 people turn into 50 kids, and they only got 2 parents, you're going to move from ribs to hot dogs.
Exactly.
Or, you're not going to be eating.
Right.
So
then you have that move being made, which obviously began to put tremendous financial pressure on the city's budget. You also had some accounting rule changes by Gatsby, which basically said that cities now need to begin to account for unfunded pension liabilities. Unfunded pension liabilities are those benefits that people will get when they retire. And so in the old days, prior to, I think, the early 90s, they did not have to even account for those expenses. But with the accounting change in GASB rules, General Accounting Standards Board, cities now had to begin to account for how they were going to pay those benefits, those future benefits, which really is nothing more than, I call it paper money, because you deal with it when you have to deal with it. You have people that are retired. You have people that have benefits. Those benefits are paid out over time. They don't all become due at one time. And so the city began to experience, I think, tremendous financial pressures, subtle pressures, which people don't really understand how this all plays in, because if you're not a municipal budget junkie, you really don't understand the little intricacies of how just a change in accounting rule can impact the city. There was also a similar change that was done for the Detroit Board of Education. When I first started working as general counsel for the school district, the school district only paid something like 3 or 4% into a state fund. Well, unilaterally, because the state fund began to lower itself, the state legislature increased the amount of the actual payment that the Detroit Board of Education had to make. So I think that payment went from 3% to 20%. A 17% increase in any line item in your budget is going to begin to put financial stress on your budget. And so you had a similar move that was employed at the school district. So now you have the two largest employers in the city beginning to experience a financial stress. One obviously taking over emergency management because they wanted to control the school board bond issue, $1.5 billion that was placed on the tax roll, and it's still on the books today.
And we and David Adamany and John Engler stepped in as if they started caring about the education of black students in Detroit. And even though
the district was performing, the district had $100 million surplus. The district had about 250,000 students, and this was before the rise and advent of charter schools within the city of Detroit, which have dramatically impacted the funding stream. And there's also some issues about how education is funded in Michigan, which we'll get to down the road.
So people can recognize some of these points that I do bring up. So Detroit Public Schools at that time, like we're talking 1990s Detroit. So 1990s Detroit.
Right.
What's happening is the largest employer of people in the city would be the city of Detroit and also Detroit Public Schools.
And probably DPS was probably larger at that time. I mean, when you're talking relative numbers of who actually were your major employers, it was DPS, I believe. It was City of Detroit. It was Chrysler. I mean, you had your automotives jumping, the GM, people like that. They account for more employees than really are physically present here in the city of Detroit.
And so we're thinking that, and then also owning of property with DPS in the city of Detroit too. And I want to frame this. So at the time, the superintendent was David Sneed. David Sneed moved forward, but the citizens supported this $1.5 billion bond to support the students.
Right.
And this was also around the time, definitely before he passed, rest in peace, Kwame Kenyatta.
Right.
He was speaking about the African-centered education movement that was happening and taking place around the city of Detroit. But what the state of Michigan was witnessing was a level of Black empowerment and awareness that only made the state of Michigan look at the city of Detroit and say, damn, it looks like they about to pull some Coleman Young again.
Yeah. But there was some, I just happened to have I was an attorney in private practice, and I actually represented, there were two Black companies that had gotten the contract. It was the first big political battle over whether Madison & Madison, Black architectural firm led by Sharon Madison, or AMAC Sales and Builder run by Andy McLemore. Two Black companies were vying to actually control the $1.5 billion bond deal. Sneed wanted, Steve wanted Madison & Madison. The board wanted AMAC, and ultimately worked out an agreement, well, I call it a power sharing arrangement, where they actually split the district in half and gave each entity $750 million. But at that time, obviously, you still had a much different population base in the city of Detroit. And once you start to look at demographic trends on where it was heading, it was clear that the number of buildings that this district would need would not be the same. because Detroit has such a long history of neighborhood schools.
Yes.
There was tremendous pressure on the school board to keep neighborhood schools open. And as a consequence of that, you spent a lot of money in small neighborhood schools, which ultimately became, I'm going to say, functionally obsolete in a period within 5 or 10 years because of loss of population and loss of facilities in those buildings. They couldn't maintain their own system.
And as the president of Northwestern High School alumni, neighborhood school guy,
all right, coach.
The other layers at this point are charter schools.
Yes.
Charter schools come in and that changes the look and layout.
Betsy DeVos led the legislative changes in Michigan, which created the charter school movement, even though Detroit, I think, had probably the most successful African-centered education programs of any school in the nation. Strong curriculum, strong administrators, strong teachers, teaching empowerment to young kids. And a lot of kids that came through those programs to this day, I mean, they manifest the integrity, the strength and courage of that African-centered education, which we needed.
Yes.
You then had the charter schools, which began to get a toehold in the city of Detroit. And they were brought here by some black operatives, I would say, of the Republican Party, which created a charter movement. But it wasn't until they began to make, I think, major changes, a loss in population of the school district, where you begin to have vacant buildings, where the quality of the education really began to decline, that charters actually took hold.
And I do think that many things are happening in this time. The face of what existed. And many realities are changing, because the Detroit that my father came to in the late 70s and you came to in the early 80s and Charlie Beckham came to in the mid 70s, like, man, look at these black folks doing all this stuff.
Right.
The idea and what could happen, even I think for the average Detroiter, we started seeing a ceiling on our sky of what black folks can do.
But there is one other factor that we have to interject in this whole thing, and that was the advent of crack cocaine.
Yeah.
And the impact of crack cocaine was devastating on our community. Crack cocaine destroyed families, destroyed generations of people. So we had grandmothers raising young children, and they'd already raised their own children, so now they have them raise another set of kids. The loss of a neighborhood structure, which really began to decline. You know, you had in the old days, you had strong neighborhood block club associations. You could always tell a strong neighborhood because they had those lights that ran up and down the community, because it was a sense of pride. So we began to lose that. We also began to we lost a lot of revenue. And so our ability to provide services, which created tremendous stress on the police department to have to respond to everything that came about. There was just a seismic shift in what was occurring in the city, and people weren't having enough conversation to really lay out and explain to people at a macro level, because if you're just trying to survive, it's very difficult for me to explain to you from a macro level how the pressures are beginning to close in on the city of Detroit.
And it was, it was my lifetime. I witnessed a lot of this. But even in witnessing a lot of this, still the creativity, and I still love it. I see so much when I'm in my neighborhood. I see, even the houses that are, boarded up and falling apart. It's like I know the family that used to stay there.
Yeah.
So I see it differently. I know the potential of what can exist, and also the freedoms of being a black entrepreneur that the city of Detroit provides me that I feel I cannot get any other place in the world.
Well, the struggle was personal to you. I mean, you've lived through a lot, and you've seen a lot, and you have the ability to understand and appreciate how things change and how we can get things back. Because there always has to be a message of aspiration and hope that we need to talk about. Because I don't think people talk enough about aspirationally how great we can be, how great we can become. How do I help you empower yourself? How do I help you move your children forward? You were telling me the story about the man across the street. You were providing him food. He asked for a book. That's a powerful statement, which meant he wants the best for his children. How do we help people in our communities get what they need so that they can be empowered to do the great work that we need to do? Because we do have a great foundation in history of brilliance, of outstanding character, of creativity, of doing the things that we need to do.
Definitely. And I guess that moves me, back to more your personal journey.
Okay.
You transitioned to working with the Coleman Young administration. And you're a young guy in there. What was that like being a young guy? What was the interview process even like? Because I hear these stories from people like Richard Hairston and even Paul Taylor and I can only imagine. But what was it like, just the interview process of like the old man wants to interview you?
So they had a great network of people and fillers, and they always could identify young talent. And so I guess I got identified as a young talent because I worked in part for Anna Diggs Taylor, who had worked in the law department. I think she was deputy corp counsel. Her and Damon Keith were good friends. I mean, they were all you had to be connected to somebody because you didn't just show up and get a job with Coleman. You had to be connected. Now, I was different because my father had never worked with him in the labor union. My mother had never worked with him. So I was kind of a different breed because I had no historic roots with him. So I kind of was a novelty, I want to say, because I wasn't really connected. So when I found out he was
Conrad Mallett. I know your dad. I'm gonna call your dad.
Yeah. I can tell you some stories about that too. So I get the call to come in for the interview. And it's just, I mean, you when you finally get to the 11th floor back in those days, I mean, it was just a buzz with the activity. And in that office, he actually had 3 secretaries. He had a secretary who sat right by his door. He had another secretary in front of her, and he had one on the other side. He had 3 secretaries. And so they would sit you in the lobby, you always had to wait. It wasn't like, the appointment was at 2 o'clock. You probably weren't going to get until 3 because things happen during the course of the day. So I finally get in, to the room to sit with him, and he's sitting back. He had kind of a little, because of that emphysema, he had that voice. How you doing, young man? Tell me about yourself. And then we just talked a lot. We talked about development because I really loved economic development. And we talked about my history, my life, my family.
And it was just you and him one-on-one?
Well, it started off with me and him one-on-one, and then Fred Martin, who was a long time, I guess he was a senior executive assistant to the mayor, may have been chief of staff for the city. His office was on the other side of the Coleman, came in, and we sat in, and after we talked for about an hour, they told me thank you very much, and they would get back with me. So then I had to wait 2 or 3 months before I heard something. Then I got a call saying I had been hired, and he came in, and it was a very different environment to work there. Because there was so much structure, because people had so much history. You had to almost kind of make your way because no one was really inviting to tell you what you had to do. You kind of had to figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
So I bumped heads with a lot of people at the city. I bumped heads with Bella Marshall because I thought I wanted to fool with some finance. I bumped heads with Charlie Williams. I bumped heads with a lot of different people. They kind of had me in a box, literally.
Yeah, you were like, damn, what is going on with these people in Detroit?
I can't make no move here. I'm thinking that I know something. I don't know nothing. So Emmett Moten, who was director of economic development, for some reason took a liking to me. And he said, young fella, you done got yourself messed up here. I'm just going to let you work with me. And that's when I began to work on the Cobo Hall expansion, Chrysler Jefferson expansion, city airport bringing commercial airline service back to the city of Detroit. It was just so many great things that I was able to learn from a person who was a master manipulator of situations.
I'm learning this history about you myself.
Yeah.
And especially you talked about something that is near and dear to me as a Detroiter.
Right.
Because everybody on the east side is like, I live by the airport. It's like, how does everybody on the east side live by the airport?
Yeah.
What was that project like?
Man, that was one of the most phenomenal projects I've ever been associated with. Actually, what happened was Southwest Airlines, they were opening up service at Metro Airport. And they gave a speech, I think, at the Economic Club of Detroit, where they talked about how they really viewed the Detroit market, why they were attracted to coming here. So we knew that we had an airport, and that we looked at the flight specifications of the aircraft, because they used the 737 aircraft. 737 aircraft actually can take off on less than 3,000 feet of runway. We only had 5,600, maybe 6,000 feet of runway at Detroit City Airport. So we knew operationally they could land on our airport. So Emmett actually approached the president of Southwest Airlines and invited him in to meet the mayor. I was able to come in that meeting where they just began to talk about how we could potentially put together a deal, because obviously their motto It's airports close in cities, Midway, Dallas Love Field. All these airports are actually in cities, and it fit their business model. So we began to work on it, understanding sort of the geometrics of how the runway have to be designed, what safety limits and things that you have to have.
And this is all new information. You're an attorney, so you're getting into physics, engineering.
Yeah, physics, engineering, flight paths, how planes land, how they come in, how they come out. And so they begin to sort of fly what I would call experimental landings and takeoffs in the city of Detroit, just to figure out how that would look and how that would operate. We then had to apply for FAA approval, and that's obviously where my legal skills came in, understanding what we needed to do, because City Airport actually was the first commercial airport in this area. And then they developed Metro Airport, after the 30s, but City Airport was first. So we put together a plan of operationally, and we came into one big headache, which was 6 Mile Road, because the way that they designed the geometrics of an airport, nothing can impinge a flight path within, a certain distance of feet of the end of the runway. And so we needed to close 6 Mile Road in order to allow for a clear takeoff and landings in City Airport. Well, we get back to City Council and became a big battle with City Council.
So now you're getting into engineering with traffic and a whole nother plan of of cars and
so we had to get a vote to close 6 Mile Road.
So you were talking to Irma Henderson and
council back in those days was way different because they questioned everything. You couldn't. What do you mean you're gonna change the light bulb? Let's talk about that. And it got to be a really contested issue, in part because the people who lived in the neighborhood didn't necessarily want to deal with a commercial airport. So we finally, I think it was a 5-4 vote. We got 6 Mile closed. That was the biggest step. Once we got that closed, then we had to fight the city of Warren, because at that time I can't remember the mayor's name, but he was fighting us tooth and nail. And I remember this classic line with Coleman, which says, "Hell, planes been flying over your head all your life. Why you worried about planes flying into Detroit?" After we got all that worked out, we got the FAA approval. They begin to fly flights in and out of the airport just to test the performance capabilities of their planes. I was fortunate to be on the first flight that actually landed in the city airport. It was a great feeling. We had some great battles over that, because that's how the city ends up owning Gethsemane Cemetery, which is to the south of the end of the runway, because we needed to put some equipment in this cemetery to allow for the flight navigation equipment in the planes to operate. And there was a story that was run by a reporter which indicated that the city was moving bodies without people's permission and approval. You don't realize how many people are buried in the cemetery until you talk about somebody's body being moved without authorization. Now, it was a completely false story. Let me just say that. But as punishment, I had to field literally every call that came into the mayor's office that talked about what went on in that cemetery. But there was an interesting dynamic to create, this opportunity for flight. We had the Aerospace Davis School, so there was an opportunity for our young African-American women.
I didn't realize that started then. I don't know why I thought.
No, Davis existed before then.
I didn't realize that was going in. I don't know why I thought that school started like in the 90s.
No, that school's been around for years. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I was there. But they changed the name, obviously, to Benjamin Davis, and respecting Chappie Davis, Air Force General. So, I mean, that was a great battle. It taught me a lot about regional negotiations, how things have to be handled, because what happened when planes landed in City Airport at that time, if it's a clear day like today, the pilots are taught to take the shortest route, which meant as long as they can see the end of the runway. It's really weird when you're sitting in the cockpit of a plane. Those pilots have phenomenal vision. If you can see the end of the runway, you're taught as a pilot to take the shortest path, because that saves jet fuel, because it's very expensive. And so what they began to do when they first started commercial service is they would come over to the Detroit River. We had an international issue with Canada because they have an airport that's almost sits parallel with Detroit City Airport. So we had to work out some international treaties with the Canadian government. And so what they would do is when they were coming to land their planes, they started flying over Grosse Pointe. Well, I can tell you what happened with that.
Yeah, I can only
We
imagine.
started getting calls from people that's like, they can't do this. So they actually restricted their point of entry. They had to continue to go down the Detroit River, which is how they fly, and come up Connor, which is how Connor lays almost parallel with the north-south runway in order to land. But there was just a lot of different issues. I mean, that was one project. Another project I can talk to you about was Victoria Park subdivision. We had not had a subdivision that had been built in Detroit since the Eisenhower administration. And I served on a board with a guy by the name of Gary Carley, who was executive vice president of then Standard Federal Bank, which ultimately became Bank of America. He said, we are interested in building a new housing subdivision in the city of Detroit, in part because we think that there is a market for new housing in the city of Detroit.
Well, I do have this question.
Okay.
Like, so as you're a young man taking on projects like this,
Yes.
like, how is this changing? Like, how is this, how are you feeling? What are your emotions? Because you always said, okay, urban development was my thing and you talked about it. And now it's like, okay, this is no longer, you're not playing Monopoly anymore.
No, we're playing
This
real.
is like, oh man, this is like what's happening just along the way for you as you're thinking about this, learning and negotiating international treaties and stuff like that. Has
Man,
to
I'm becoming full of myself.
be, yeah, but it almost has to be surreal.
You know, your success breeds a level of confidence because you understand, now you begin to understand how all these pieces of the puzzle fit together.
Mm-hmm.
How important it was for Detroit to have commercial airline service because people can now drive 5 minutes to the airport, get on a plane, get to Chicago, and be home for dinner. Things of that nature were very, very important economically because it drives a lot of engine, and it does drive revenue to help you uplift and improve the quality of your airport because your employments are tied to the type of funding that you can get from FAA grants. And so you begin to understand now how important all these things are to fit together, which was why creating new housing opportunities became almost a passion. And so I remember having a conversation with Gary Carley. He said he wanted to do a project in the city of Detroit. So I was really excited. So I go back, you know, and you have to sign up. You have to sign a list to get in to see the mayor. I mean, I wasn't at the high enough level where I could just demand to walk in. Yeah. That wasn't happening.
Oh,
I'm
sure you would not want to hear the colorful language associated with
you gotta go
popping
through,
in on him.
You got to go through 3 secretaries, okay?
Uh-huh.
So I told them that I had a commitment from the head of the largest bank in the state of Michigan that they wanted to do a housing subdivision in the city of Detroit. Now, however they process information, stuff like that got through really quick. He calls me and he says, who is this guy? What's he all about? I said, man, the guy wants to do something in Detroit. He said, call him up. I want to meet with him tomorrow. Called the guy up. We meet with him the next day. He says, Mr. Mayor, we're prepared to build a new subdivision in the city of Detroit. They had what they called in those days was the Homorama, where the Builders Association of Southeastern Michigan would find a subdivision to put new homes on display. He said the only issue we have to do is we have to negotiate with the Builders Association of Southeastern Michigan, a guy by the name of Irv Yaknis. He was the general counsel president, which is a weird combination to have for an individual. It was one of the toughest negotiations I ever had. But what we learned from that is when you look at the Victoria Park subdivision to this day, it has stood the test of time because there were certain things that they needed in order that, but they felt needed to be successful. It had to have kind of a suburban feel. You know, you had to have the road curves. You had to have a lot of different things that we had to negotiate in the city. When Coleman was mayor, was able to shift resources around to create the footprint and the infrastructure for that subdivision to be built, which to this day is the most successful subdivision ever built by the Builders Association of Southeastern Michigan. Wow. People who bought their houses on the front end of Victoria Park subdivision, when they turned around and sold their houses in 4 or 5 years, I mean, they were doubling their prices of what they got. And it was a great project. It taught me a lot about how you really have to negotiate, how you structure your deals. Is a give and take in all of this. And we were able to walk away with a product that people to this day, when you look at the subdivision, it looks absolutely beautiful still.
And as you speak about that, this is unique as the Detroit nerd in me. I'll sometimes just go to King Books, but I was looking for information specifically about, the structure of Detroit government. Yeah. And I found a book that was the plans for Harbortown.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was looking at it and I was like, man, this is unique that like just the details into the Harbortown plans. I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is $5. This has got to be worth $5. This will help me in business one day.
Well, that was the old Michigan Consolidated Gas passed. I think it was the company. It was a guy by the name of Larry Marintet. He was in their real estate development division. They wanted to do something in the city of Detroit, and they picked that site because it was on the water. It offered great amenities, and they could build high-rise that would make it attractive for people to live there. And that was a pretty decent and successful project to this day. I mean, the values for what people are getting for those properties is still relatively strong.
Yeah. And now, as you get this experience, you shift back into personal practice too. What was the catalyst back into personal practice in that time, and then you get back into government definitely.
Right. So what happened was, I mean, you never leave an election during election year. You don't leave your position during election year. And so the rumors were that that the mayor wasn't going to run again, and so I said I need to begin to figure out what my transition strategy and plan was going to be. And so I began to throw out some feelers, to some different law firms who were interested in a person with my skill set. And so I took a position. I became of counsel to Dyke & Gossett. Of counsel is a position where you're treated like a partner, but you don't have a share in the income of the firm. You just get a pretty decent salary. So I did that for a couple of years. Really didn't like that big firm experience, and so I decided I need to go into private practice for myself. So I hooked up with 3 other brothers, 2 of which were practicing together, and me and another guy joined the firm. And so we created our own firm where I specialized in affordable housing development. That really was one of my fortes, and because I love housing development, infrastructure, and things of that nature. So we grew this firm to probably about 14 attorneys, 25 support staff, and brothers decided that they want to go in different directions. So we dissolved the firm, and I became actually a public housing consultant. Because I did a lot of work for the Detroit Housing Commission, where you look at the Jeffries, which became Woodbridge Estates. Yeah, that was one of my projects. Herman Gardens, how they transformed that. That was one of my projects. Actually, the first major one was Parkside Homes, which was the first kind of Hope 6 project where they talked about integrating market rate and public housing people together. So I kind of did that. So I really began
like layers of stuff. Like, you name it, neighborhoods of my favorite girlfriends in the past.
Exactly. And I mean, and along the way, there was the Wayne County Water Park in Chandler Park. I was instrumental in that. The Wayne County Youth Home, the first one downtown, right across from Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. I mean, there's so many projects I could point to that I've been involved in. I've probably forgotten more projects. East Lake Baptist Church. I mean, a lot of church development in the city of Detroit. I just had my hands in a lot of that. So after I did my public housing stint and traveled around the country, I got a call from the school board. They were looking for an attorney who could be general counsel, who had a great experience in economic development, who understood the city. So I go in, I interview, they make me general counsel for the school district, where I'm over both the general counsel budget, but I'm also over the Title I funding budget for Title I for the schools. So I had a dual role in compliance in both of those departments, which gave me a much broader perspective of school districts. And I probably have visited, back in those days, I probably have visited more than 200 schools because, schools in those days, they had a lot of career days, and they always wanted the lawyers to come out and speak to them. So I've been in so many schools in the city of Detroit.
Is coming up. It's a virtual career day. It's Tuesday. Yes.
And so I had this thing where I could walk into a building and I could tell you exactly what was going on in the building by the sound that I heard when I walked in the door. Wow. And there was some incredible educational environments. We have to understand the district was organic in that you had teachers who had been in buildings for years. They taught children, and they taught the mothers. I mean, it was a great family relationship and connection with the community.
The building stock too. So like the printing press at Cody, I went to Northwestern, so we had a planetarium, a radio television studio. Right. Central had a full recording studio. Like these schools have like different assets that Henry Ford like has like a whole like machinist training.
Well, I mean, you talking about the vocational, technical schools, which obviously came about, which were in response to a lot of the desegregation that occurred in the city of Detroit with the battle for local control over school districts and Judge Keefe's dynamic ruling about cross-district busing, which actually led to a famous Supreme Court case, Milliken versus Bradley, where the Supreme Court said that unless you can prove that the segregation in a school system is the direct result of the state, you cannot have cross-district busing as a remedy to deal with that, which led to the rise, coincidentally, of Brooks Patterson, who was a vehement anti-busing advocate, a racist, who fought that tooth and nail. And so we begin to look at personalities of people who developed over time during that time period and their impact. To this day, his impact on not wanting a viable regional transportation bus system, which we so desperately need. Yeah. So I come into the school district. I'm placed into this position, and this is during the time when they had the Ken Burnley. He was the superintendent. He was a superintendent, but he was a state imposed superintendent.
The emergency management.
Right, exactly. And so we get into major battles. Because I'm general counsel, I have to sign off on a lot of the actions that they were taking. And there were a lot of things that they were doing that I just simply did not agree with it. Did not agree with the decision to sell the school centers building in Wayne State, to take a condo interest in that. I felt that they should have been spending much more money in trying to consolidate schools, but they were trying to hold on to a neighborhood school model that was going to be antiquated within 10 years, which is why you had decisions made on spending money in buildings that ultimately closed down in 4 or 5 years because the demographics didn't say that those buildings could be sustained. And so they should have been looking at a different approach. They also should have been looking at the fact that with the rise in charter schools and a cap on how these things were impacting the city, that the district, from my perspective, should have moved and begin to license charter schools in the city of Detroit.
The district licensed some, but it was later on.
It was almost, but by then the horse was out the barn. Yeah. Because what they could have done with their infrastructure, they could have provided services, food service, security services to these other charter schools, which they could have had much more control over. The product that they were offering, and we had tremendous battles on this whole issue, policy perspective about what was going on. So about 2004, I started getting calls from Kwame Kilpatrick. I didn't really know him. I knew his mother and his father. I had worked with his father because I had been hired by the McNamara administration to do projects, the Wayne County Water Park, the Wayne County Youth Home. These are projects that General Counsel, a lady by the name of Jennifer Granholm, was the general counsel. And because in those days, everything was negotiated. There wasn't any surprises that happened at Wayne County. Everything was already agreed to before it came to the table. So I started getting calls from him. He's asking me if I'd like to work with him. And I'm like, man, I got a great job. I got great staff. Low levels of stress. I'm seeing you taking water every day. Yeah. It just wasn't something I was interested in. So I got a call from Bella Marshall, Don Barton, Bill Brooks, some business people in Detroit. They say, look, we need you to go over and help this young man. He's having issues. He needs somebody who understands the lay of the land, who's experienced in government, who knows how these parts fit together. We think you would be a good fit for him. So I finally go meet with the guy, and the cat was dynamically, brilliant.
Very, for people that don't know, and I've met him many times, and it's so funny. And it was like, boy, sometimes my temper rarely runs when guy. I'm in this discussion, and I'm talking about like just brilliant and how eloquent he is, and then this guy's like, well, white guy was like, well, I'm a guard for where he's at. And I'm like, would you say some goofy shit like that? Excuse my French, but very eloquent, very persuasive.
Yes, very
brilliant,
persuasive.
And even
quick study.
Yeah.
Retention. He probably was a 80-90% retention guy. He could read complex documents, decipher quickly, and then be able to articulate. Yeah. I recall one time there was a meeting when the minister was coming to Detroit, and there was a call out from the Jewish constituency that they were not in favor of him meeting with the minister, and so he invited the coalition in, and we were sitting around the table having a conversation. And he says this thing. He says, he says, up until the time I was in the 8th grade, I actually went to a church that believed that white folks were the devil. You could have heard a pin drop
Yeah.
up in the room because he so caught them off guard with that comment. And then he broke it back and said, but you have to understand, in my community, the minister is revered.
Yeah.
He is a welcome member in our community, and we have to respect him and give him his due. So when he comes here, you have to understand that he's a part of my community just like you're a part of my community. Like I would meet with members of your religious sect.
As well.
I have to meet with him as well. He says, and if you would like to, I would be more than happy to
introduction.
To the introduction.
They don't want that.
That introduction never got taken. But I mean, it's just saying that's just kind of the person that he was. And coming in was a different environment at that point in time. The city was much smaller. The demands were much greater. And then I saw him in a much more high level position
and
as
also,
deputy mayor.
And also, a lot of things changed from Coleman Young to Dennis Archer as well.
Yeah.
and just the expectations of what city services were.
Yeah.
And then also the understanding, because Coleman Young's legacy was so large and looming. But when I speak of his administration and his legacy, it was like an interconnection of like some of the most brilliant and greatest Black minds leading up to propel a Coleman Young into that place. It's almost like the best and the brightest in their 20s and their 30s. Like I've heard these stories that, through
Charlie Beckham. I mean, Malcolm Dade.
Yeah.
I mean, Beckham's brother. You just had great minds, great strategists, great thinkers. They were thinkers. See, people, we have an anti-intellectual bent in our community. We really don't like people who think, but we should, because people who think can analyze and decipher and break things down, so that puts people in a much better position to give information that people need in order to determine whether or not a good decision is being made.
And that brings us, as we get closer to a close, I have my classic questions, but before then, right now you're running for mayor. What was the catalyst to say it's time and I need to be in this position?
When you look at what has gone on in the city of Detroit, especially over the last 4 years, with the acceleration of gentrification in our neighborhoods, with the massive takeaway of tax captures and abatement, which is stripping away resources and money from our schools and our libraries. When you look at the fact that Black contracting is at an all-time low, when you look at the fact that the average income of a Detroit person is $27,000, when you look at the fact that we have more people who rent versus rather than own their homes, when you begin to look at the fact that crime is out of control, when you begin to look at the fact that we have somehow lost our way, because when you look at the elected leadership in the city of Detroit, you have a white mayor, you have a Chinese American state senator on the east side of Detroit. You have an East Asian guy who just moved here from Ann Arbor that ran and became a state legislature. We have an Italian American superintendent of Detroit Public Schools who looks to see where are we in leadership in our own city. And when you also begin to look at the fact that people's voices have been silent, that people are quiet about what's going on in this city, that I just felt there was a need for someone to stand up and say, no, not anymore. That we need to debate these issues, that you can't tell me that it's raining when I know you're peeing on my head. We got to be able to force the issue, to be much more aggressive in our conversation about what's going on in this town, because the traditional voices of people who you expect to speak up, they've been silent.
And it's unique too, like coming to that conclusion, because it's a family decision, as I've seen people that I've loved, and my godmother being Joanne Watson, and just my family's
Mama Watson. I gotta tell you a story about her before we break up.
And so many, like, running for office is like, that's a family decision. It's daunting. It's you've seen it.
Yes.
Campaigning is work within itself, but then in the office, that's a whole nother form. So what was it like even talking to your friends, your family, your wife of, all right, this is what I'm about to do?
So, when I talked to my wife initially, she was very, very hesitant and really didn't want me doing this. She felt that obviously the sacrifices that you have to make in order to run for this position, whether it's financial, you're going to be under much more tremendous stress because they have a machine out there that grinds people up and spits them out. And so you've got to have really a strong intestinal fortitude, which she has. She's a very strong woman, sister from the west side of Detroit, who believes in me, who believes in my policies. And so after we had much conversation, thought, and prayer,
that was the first negotiation.
Well, and we had much prayer. We felt that we had what it would take in order to propel and make this battle successful, because the victory has already been claimed. When you're out on the street as much as I am, and you talk to people who have lost hope and who are looking for that kernel of hope and expectation, it's so refreshing to hear it, because people who are not connected to the politics have a much different world than people who are connected to the politics of the city.
Yeah, and I do think that, because there are definitely many people that say this can't happen, that can't happen, but just from the way my dad speaks about things and some of the elders I look up to, and when they talk about the structure and how things could and can happen, and then I see then I see the smoke and mirrors of some of the things or what I feel like are smoke and mirrors.
They are.
Of the things that are happening now. Like, I open Cranes and they say like all these people that work for Quicken Loans. And I think to myself, well, like, I mean, you give me the access to some of the properties and
well, it's a dangerous thing for one man to own everything.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous thing, and we've got to begin to diversify ownership in downtown Detroit.
And then we got to talk about, like, I mean, if it was given, I don't know how much of it I can really call true ownership.
Well, when you talk about the level of abatement that's been given over time to support the projects that he has, I mean, I'm gonna give him credit for being strategic, because he sees value. When we were talking offline today, we talk about how we need to view value in our own communities, where some people see vacant land, some people see the opportunity to own a lot of land and property in the city of Detroit. So we got to begin to change people's mindsets about value and what's important. Can I give you my Joanne Watson story?
Yeah, please do.
So we're negotiating, and there's some issues with the library, with the zoo, about potential transfer of control because the city can no longer afford to finance the zoo itself. So there was a big meeting in city council one day where I made a statement to say that if you all don't vote for this, we're going to have to close the zoo down. City council got bombarded with phone calls from everybody in the region. They were getting killed. Their switchboard was completely jammed. And so after I made that statement, which was very provocative, and provocative so because when you're deputy mayor, you have to be provocative at times to get people to move in a direction. So Mama Watson called Quam, as they say, and she says, that boy came up here and threatened us. And we're getting killed now. We're not voting for nothing unless he comes up here and apologizes. So Mayor comes in and says, Mama Watson, she mad at you. As he's laughing, I said, you sent me up there to take the bullet. I said, but ain't nowhere in the world I'm going up there and apologizing for nothing. He said, I know, I get it. He said, but you don't have to apologize. You don't have to say I apologize. But what you should say was, if you were offended by what I said, that was not my intent. I think that's a good compromise. So I have to go up to council, man, and we're in the main hall, the main auditorium, man, and auditorium is packed, because, Mama Watson could always have her people up there, and they were very vocal. Yeah. And so I go into my speech, and they're, you need to apologize. You're just hearing it from the back of the room. You need to apologize to Mama Watson, blah, blah, blah. And I said, if you were offended by my comments, that was not my intent. The room went crazy. We ultimately did get the vote happening, but is that what you learn is that oftentimes you're put in situations to bring movement together. At the end of the day, we all were still family, and I consider her to be obviously one of my dearest friends. And you continuously learn in these positions that the art of compromise is so important, that sometimes you just have to sit down and work things out.
And I think that's very true. And then also, having respectful discourse.
Yes.
Because we need to see different layers.
Yes.
My journey in media and podcasting is like, my perspective is we need to do this, and media needs to be that. Like, we need more maker spaces. Can you empower people with maker spaces? And then you know, as ideas open up, then I end up in that place and I learn okay, well, then if people are doing this with maker spaces, this impacts a block like that. How do you impact traffic flow? And then you start saying like, all right, I didn't think of all that now, you know? So it's good to have that discourse.
Yes,
so
you have to.
Here are your classic Detroit is Different questions. What was your very first car? Year, make, and model, and when did you get it?
It was a 68 Mustang.
Wow,
I got it in 1973, and I wrecked it, I think, 2 months later.
Okay, do you remember? Where was the first place you went?
I think I probably went to a park to show off. They had a park called Eden Park, and you know that's where people would hang out. And I just drove through, and I thought I was the real deal.
A 68 Mustang. That's a heck of a man.
Yeah.
You said you wrecked it.
It was black. It was black with a red interior.
Oh.
It was my mother gave it to me because I think she went and actually bought her a 73 Monte Carlo.
Okay.
I think that's what she did. So she gave me her
73 Monte Carlo.
Yeah, you know, the 2-door with the big front seat. Those big front seats came in handy at times.
See those gas guzzlers, man. I'm telling you, those old school cars. I mean, you see them, you know, you see them all the time with people. That's why it's the dream cruise.
Yeah.
It's still a dream of cruising in those vehicles.
Exactly.
So you're the DJ.
Yes.
At the end of the fireworks.
Right.
Well, I don't even know how they did this but Woodward and Jefferson. That's what I always say. I don't know what's happening with the Spirit of Detroit Park thing.
Right.
You get to play one song.
Right.
What song are you playing for the crowd? And it's the end of the fireworks, and then there's highlights on you.
We're trying to calm the crowd down, and we're trying to pump them up.
It's however you feel it.
It probably would be, it would be Summer Madness. Yeah, Summer Madness.
Okay. Some Roy Ayers, that'll definitely calm people down, but a cool vibe.
Yeah, cool vibe, man. Let's just go home on a nice vibe. Let's everybody get home safely.
Okay. And the very last question, if you could rename Woodward after one Detroiter, who would it be and why?
I mean, it has to be Coleman Alexander Young Boulevard. It would have to be. Great politician who did some things people don't understand. The Cobo Hall expansion project was the greatest political maneuver ever pulled off in the state of Michigan. Why? Because Coleman Young was able to convince suburban legislatures to pass a regional tax to support the expansion of Cobo Hall, and they had no control over it. Masterful move, bringing people down for the Grand Prix, working with Karub & Associates, a lobbying firm in Lansing, putting all together the package and the funding necessary to make that happen in opposition of suburban leaders who did not want it to happen. Greatest political feat I've ever seen. And I mean, the People Mover was another one, but that is the greatest because he was able to impose on the regional cities a hotel, motel, liquor tax to finance the expansion of Cobo Hall. Greatest political move I've ever seen in my life.
Wow. That's you added layers. He's usually so it's like I would say it's probably Coleman Young, then Aretha Franklin. Some people say Berry Gordy, and then we get some off options. Sometimes Mayor Kilpatrick actually.
It depends on what you're talking about creative energy and bringing together and creating a sound and a soul for the city. Obviously, is Berry Gordy and Motown. Mm-hmm. When you talk about the great intellect and legal minds, we've had so many great ones, whether it was Damon Keefe and Crockett. I mean, we had great black legal minds in this town.
Even Milton Henry.
Milton Henry. I mean, Republic of New Africa, the birth of black liberation theology in the city of Detroit, which is why I find it so amazing that people are so passive when you look at the history and the roots and the origins of where the people came from in this city. It is not a passive city in mindset. It is not a passive city in theology. So we've got to restore the pride, restore the greatness, and I'm here to go out here and fight this battle for the people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much. This was a great interview. I'm going to get it up ASAP.
All right.
Peace.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.